Some of the worst advice I find online for landlords and investors of residential property is around maintenance, particularly trying to get your tenants to do all the maintenance so you have no responsibilities on the property. That, my friends, is a terrible idea, but it's not as simple as that. I'll break it down in today's video. I'm Hold It with PM Jen. I have over 22 years of managing residential properties for owners, and I have learned so much that I want to share with you about the hold part of the buy and hold journey. When I think about maintenance in rental properties, I think about it in 5 different categories. The first one, I'll call it lawn, snow, cleaning. Now this is different depending if it's a multifamily property or a single family property. So if it's a multifamily property and those things like the common areas, the halls, the laundry rooms, the mail room, the exterior spaces, if that's all shared, then it is very likely you, the landlord, should be doing those services. When you have tenants doing pieces of lawn or pieces of sidewalk or even pieces of common building maintenance, it really doesn't work out. It doesn't maintain your building well. You're liable to get codes violations for undone things, and it's really just cleaner and better to do it yourself as the landlord or hire a service to do it. That is generally expected in multifamily properties. Now, if you're renting a single family property, it's really much more conventional to have those sorts of responsibilities be the tenants. So snow removal, usually the tenants. Lawn care is a tricky one, and it depends on a couple of things. One, is there a safe, reasonable place to store lawn equipment? So if there's no shed, if there's no garage, if there's no proper place outside of the living quarters to store something with gasoline or something like that, then landlord, you really need to provide that lawn care. However, if there's sheds or garages, at least in my market in North Central Pennsylvania, it's really conventional to have tenants do that as part of their lease responsibility. Now, if the property's expansive, think of an estate property. Maybe this is a very large 4,000, 5,000 square foot home, beautiful landscaping and expansive grounds. It's generally not advisable to have a tenant required to do lawn care on a very large piece of land or where it's really extensive. We would want a service to come in for that. Now, one of the most tempting things to do is to hire the tenant to do those services for you. So in the multifamily example, you have a 4-unit and maybe you have a laundry room. It's very tempting to contract with unit number 1 and say, hey, I'll give you a $50 a month rent credit if you clean the laundry room. That's very tempting and it sounds very easy, and I'm sure it works. I don't find it working as well as most people think it does. Typically, the services are less than expected. So when we walk the property, we find those services not being done, although the tenant is, of course, taking the financial benefits that are being offered to them. So it's my encouragement to you to contract third party for those. The second category of maintenance I've come up with, I call it consumables maintenance. I think about this as bulbs, batteries, and filters. So bulbs and batteries are easy. You usually see batteries in smoke detectors. Typically, it's the responsibility of the tenant to replace those, but maybe in your state, maybe in your lease, maybe it's your preference that you be doing that annually. You would put that in your lease. When it comes to bulbs, it's really easy to say, well, the tenant should change their own light bulbs. Sure, generally speaking, that makes a lot of sense. But the devil's in the details here. What about something that might take a 20-foot ladder to address? An exterior light, for example. What if the filter to be replaced is in a hard to access attic hatch where you have to get up? I've had those before where you had to take a ladder and stand on the very top and kind of push yourself over a ledge. It was quite dangerous to change that filter. That would be a situation where you wouldn't want tenants doing that. Thinking through, maybe it's a fluorescent bulb. So in our lease, we've set several different criteria. It doesn't address every single situation that can come up in the hundreds of properties that we have, but it does draw some pretty basic guidelines. You need to think through some of those things that apply to your properties and address it in the lease. Like I said, the devil's in the details. Let's agree on how these things are going to be done so we don't have tenant and landlord frustration and resentment later when you're trying to draw those boundaries. The third type of maintenance I've categorized is what I call wear and tear. This is the stuff that's going to happen over the course of time, right? We're going to need to service the HVAC system. Maybe we'll need to replace a part. We're going to have to repaint from time to time. Appliances are going to break down and need repairs. Maybe gaskets will dry out and we'll start to get some leaks on the plumbing and we'll have to repair those. So as you know, those things will come up and they'll need to be addressed. So who's responsible for it? I believe the landlord is. Now, some of the worst advice I see given out online is to put a deductible or make the maintenance entirely the responsibility of the tenant. A maintenance deductible would look like the first $50 of every maintenance need is the responsibility of the tenant. Anything beyond that, the landlord will cover. And we get it. You're trying to not be called out for teeny tiny little things. You don't want to be nitpicked to death. Well, that's not really usually the problem. A bigger problem is things being ignored at your property because they're not something that the tenant wants to do, wants to pay for, or even understands how to do. So the maintenance deductible and putting the responsibility of maintenance on tenants, I think is really short-sighted and a terrible idea. But this is only 22 years of experience talking, working with over hundreds and hundreds of investors. I'll tell you, I've seen this bite more people than it's helped. Now, that brings up the next category of maintenance, the maintenance related to tenant damage or negligence, right? We're scared of this. We're scared, what if the tenant never replaces the air filter on the HVAC system and that unit burns up and requires repair or replacement? What if they never report a roof leak? What if they're sloppy at showering? What if they clog the plumbing with grease and things that shouldn't be in the pipes? Well, friends, this does happen. And who's responsible for the expense of that is the tenant. Now, how does that work in my business? Well, we will either discover the need or the tenant will report it. So how does that work in my business? Well, we'll either discover it or the tenant will report it. We'll address the issue, we'll get it repaired, and if it's an issue of tenant negligence or damage, we'll then bill that reimbursement back to the tenant. So using an example here, maybe the tenant locked themselves out, kicked in the door, damaging the door, the lock, and the door frame in order to gain access to their home. They report it or we find it. We're gonna make the repairs to the property. We're gonna ensure that it is promptly fixed and in good condition. Then we're going to turn around and issue a reimbursement to the tenant for the exact amount that it costs to fix. Not more, not less. Now, as you can imagine, billing the tenant for these sorts of repairs sometimes has mixed results. In our experience, most times they completely understand and they're eager to pay it back. They're grateful for a solution that they didn't have to figure out how to replace that window or how to get the plumbing unclogged, and they'll make the payment. The other way this could go is the tenant starts telling you, no, this was not my responsibility. No, landlord, this is your responsibility and I refuse to pay for it. Well, this is where experience comes in and knowing how to document things as you find them and as you investigate them to determine liability. And we're really good at that here at One Focus, tracking and making sure that no matter what, if we're billing it to you, we feel like we would win in front of a judge. And if we don't, then we typically don't bill it back. And sometimes there's things that happen in properties where you go, I think the tenant caused this, but if we can't prove it, well then we simply can't and we must fix it and keep moving. The last kind of maintenance I'll talk about today is capital improvements. These are large-scale improvements to a property that preserve its value or increase its value. Usually they're depreciable. So you would take an amount of them. So maybe you put a $30,000 roof on, you would take a portion of that each year as an expense against your taxes. It depends on how your accountant is using your depreciation. There's a lot of different strategies there. But all that to say, the landlord's going to pay for these things, and you should be holding back money and contributing from your income every month to a capital improvements fund so that when the roof needs to be replaced or the boiler needs to be replaced or you need a sewer lateral or new sidewalks, that there's funds there for that. That should be considered almost an expense, not technically, but you should be monthly contributing a portion of your income to a reserve account for those purposes specifically. Now, you probably watched this video thinking, I really want to know how to save money on maintenance, and that's probably a whole nother video, but I'll give you what we found in our extensive experience managing properties, knowing all the income and expenses related to them. The best dollar you can invest in maintenance savings is in inspections and preventive maintenance. And we've seen that happen with religious maintenance, preventive maintenance, so servicing of HVAC systems, inspections and fixing small items, making sure smoke detectors and dryer ducts are attended to. All of this, all of these practices keep the overall maintenance costs down considerably. We've seen the biggest impact on emergency maintenance. Our techs hardly get called out anymore because of the great work we're doing with preventive maintenance, which leads to happier tenants. They're having less disturbances in the home, better quality of life, and our owners are getting less expense on their P&L, so everybody's happy. Thanks so much for watching this whole video. I hope you'll follow me at Hold It with PM Jen, where I'm dishing out real life advice on how to do the hold part of buy and hold better. Till next time.